My name is Grace, and I'm 29 years old. Right now, my hands are shaking as I place my one-way ticket to London on the airport security counter. My phone won't stop buzzing with furious texts from my sister Madison. Just 12 hours ago, she stood in my living room, demanding every penny of my life savings for her so-called emergency. When I said no, she destroyed everything we'd built as sisters. Now I'm running, not from her, but toward the life I should have chosen years ago. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you someone who's dealt with family members who only see you as their personal ATM? Hit that like button if you believe family shouldn't mean financial manipulation, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself when blood relatives cross the line. Trust me, what my sister did next will leave you speechless. 3 months before that moment at the airport, I stood in a Charleston funeral home, gripping Madison's hand as we said goodbye to our grandmother Dorothy. Madison was 31, 2 years older than me, and in that moment of grief, she was everything a big sister should be. She held me when I cried, whispered memories of grandmother's sugar cookies and Sunday dinners, and promised we'd get through this loss together. If only I'd known that Dorothy's death would transform my sister into someone I no longer recognized. The reading of the will took place the following week in a stuffy law office downtown. Madison and I sat side by side on leather chairs, our shoulders touching for comfort. When the lawyer announced that grandmother had left me $150,000, I felt the blood drain from my face. Madison received Dorothy's extensive jewelry collection, including pieces that had been in our family for generations. At first, she seemed genuinely happy for me. She threw her arms around my neck and whispered that I deserved every penny, that grandmother always knew I was the responsible one. You see, I'd worked as a pediatric nurse at Charleston Children's Hospital for 7 years. Every paycheck, I'd put aside whatever I could, living in a modest one-bedroom apartment and driving a 10-year-old Honda Civic. My closet was full of scrubs, not designer clothes. My idea of a fancy dinner was takeout from the Thai place down the street. Madison, on the other hand, lived a completely different life. As a real estate agent married to Blake, an investment banker, she drove a white Mercedes, lived in a waterfront home, and posted Instagram photos from expensive restaurants every weekend. The first hint of resentment came 3 weeks after the will reading. We were having coffee at our usual spot when Madison casually mentioned how interesting it was that grandmother had divided things so unevenly. I reminded her that the jewelry collection was worth at least $70,000 according to the appraisal, but she waved her manicured hand dismissively. Those were sentimental pieces, she said, not liquid assets like cash. I felt a tiny alarm bell ring in my head, but ignored it. Our family dynamics had always been complicated. Our parents died in a car accident when I was 15 and Madison was 17. Grandmother Dorothy stepped in immediately, moving us into her Victorian home and raising us through our teenage years. She paid for my nursing degree and Madison's business school education equally. She loved us both fiercely, but I'll admit there was a special bond between her and me. While Madison spent her evenings at parties and social events, I stayed home with Dorothy, helping her tend her garden and listening to stories about her youth. What Madison didn't know was that I'd been harboring a secret dream for years. Ever since a visiting doctor from London gave a lecture at our hospital, I'd fantasized about studying pediatric medicine at King's College. I'd even started the application process twice, but always backed out, feeling obligated to stay close to home, close to family. The inheritance could make that dream possible, but I pushed the thought away. Family came first, always. Madison started making jokes about borrowing money almost immediately. They started small, little comments while we sorted through grandmother's house. She'd hold up an antique vase and say things like, "Maybe you could loan me enough to keep this in the family since you're so flush with cash now." I'd laugh uncomfortably and change the subject. Blake's behavior grew strange during this time too. He started taking mysterious business trips, leaving for days at a time with vague explanations. Madison would show up at my apartment with red eyes, claiming allergies, but I could see the stress wearing on her. One evening, Madison let slip that she and Blake were trying expensive fertility treatments. She mentioned the $30,000 price tag casually, watching my reaction from the corner of her eye. I offered emotional support immediately, told her I'd go to appointments with her, research the best clinics. She smiled and patted my hand, saying it was so nice to have a sister with resources. The way she said resources made my skin crawl. Strange incidents started piling up. Madison somehow knew exactly how much I had in my savings account, mentioning the specific number during a conversation about vacation plans. When I asked how she knew, she laughed and said I must have told her. I knew I hadn't. A week later, I came home from a 12-hour shift to find Madison in my apartment. She had a key for emergencies, but finding her in my home office was unsettling. She claimed she was looking for aspirin, but my medicine cabinet was in the bathroom, nowhere near my desk where I kept my financial documents. The truth about Blake's job didn't come from Madison. I overheard it at the grocery store from one of his co-workers' wives. He'd been laid off from the investment firm 3 weeks earlier. When I confronted Madison gently, asking if everything was okay financially, she erupted in tears and accused me of being paranoid and judgmental. She stormed out of my apartment, but not before I noticed her slip something into her purse from my desk drawer. Madison's mask didn't slip all at once. It cracked slowly, like ice under pressure. I watched her snap at a teenage waitress for bringing the wrong salad dressing, her voice dripping with venom. I was in her car when she flew into a road rage incident so severe, I had to grab the wheel to prevent her from ramming another vehicle. My boyfriend Derek, a sweet paramedic I'd been dating for 2 years, pulled me aside after a family dinner and asked if Madison seemed different to me. He'd watched her corner me in the kitchen 3 times, each time bringing up money in increasingly aggressive ways. The manipulation reached new levels when Madison started revising our shared history. Suddenly, she was telling anyone who would listen about the time she gave me her kidney when we were children. It was a complete fabrication. I'd had appendicitis at 12, nothing more. But she told the story with such conviction, such detail, that even I almost wondered if I'd forgotten some major surgery. She'd mastered the art of the guilt trip, bringing up every tiny favor she'd ever done, inflating them into life-changing sacrifices. The discovery that shattered my trust came from my cousin Stephanie. She called me one night, uncomfortable and awkward, to ask if it was true that I was hoarding grandmother's inheritance while Madison struggled to pay for cancer treatments. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Madison had been spreading lies throughout our extended family, painting me as a selfish monster who cared more about money than my sister's health. When I tried to confront Madison about these lies, she broke down in hysterics, claiming the stress was making her act out of character. She sobbed on my shoulder, and I held her, still wanting to believe in the sister I'd grown up with. Looking back, I should have seen the pattern. Madison had always been the golden child to the outside world, charming and vivacious, while managing to subtly undermine me. In high school, she'd convinced our grandmother I'd been sneaking out at night, when it was actually her climbing out the window. She'd borrowed my prom dress without asking and returned it stained, then told everyone I'd lent it to her already ruined. These seemed like petty sibling rivalries at the time, but now I recognized them as early signs of her true character. The weekly visits started innocuously enough. Every Wednesday evening, Madison would appear at my door with a bottle of wine and takeout from our favorite places. She'd curl up on my couch like she had when we were teenagers, and we'd watch old movies and talk until midnight. These evenings felt like a return to better times, before money and inheritance had complicated everything. Madison would stroke my hair and tell me how grateful she was to have me as her sister, how we were the only family each other had left. During one of these wine-soaked evenings, Madison began opening up about her fertility journey. She showed me injection bruises on her stomach, talked about the hormones that made her feel crazy, the disappointment of failed cycles. The pain in her voice was real, I was certain of that. She mentioned, almost offhandedly, that they'd already spent $20,000 on treatments, with at least $30,000 more needed for a real chance at success. She never asked directly, but her eyes lingered on me, waiting. The following week, she brought photo albums from grandmother's house. We spent hours going through them, laughing at our teenage fashion choices, and crying over pictures of our parents. Madison had a story for every photo, memories I'd somehow forgotten. "Remember when you got lost at the state fair and I found you," she'd say, or "remember when I fought that girl who bullied you in 7th grade." Some stories rang true, others felt manufactured, but in the warm glow of nostalgia, I didn't question them. It was Derek who first noticed things going missing from my apartment. Small things initially, like a phone charger here, a book there. Then I realized my spare credit card was gone from my drawer. When I mentioned it to Madison during one of her visits, she helped me look everywhere, even calling the credit card company for me. It was only later I remembered she'd been alone in my apartment the week before when I'd run down to let Derek in the building. Madison's knowledge of my finances became increasingly unsettling. She'd make comments about interest rates on my savings account, suggest better investment strategies, even mention specific purchases I'd made. When I changed my online banking password, she threw a fit, accusing me of not trusting her. She said sisters shouldn't have secrets from each other, that my paranoia was insulting to our bond. I found myself apologizing, even though I knew something was deeply wrong. The revelation about Blake's job loss came in pieces. First, Madison mentioned they were downsizing their lifestyle, maybe selling the boat. Then she let slip that Blake was exploring new opportunities. Finally, during a particularly wine-heavy evening, she admitted he'd been let go months ago, but begged me not to mention it to anyone. The shame in his family would be unbearable, she said. I held her while she cried, promising to keep their secret, even as I wondered why she'd hidden this from me for so long. Madison's behavior became increasingly erratic. One day she'd be my loving sister, the next she'd be cold and calculating. I watched her study me like a chess player planning moves. She'd test different approaches, seeing what made me most sympathetic. The fertility story would evolve, adding details about her desperate desire to give our parents grandchildren they'd never meet. When that didn't get the response she wanted, she'd switch to tales of Blake's depression, his threats of self-harm if they lost their house. The mask slipped completely during a dinner at an upscale restaurant. Madison had insisted on taking me out to celebrate a big real estate deal. Halfway through the meal, her credit card was declined. Then another. Then a third. The waitress was discreet, but Madison exploded. She screamed about incompetent service, threatened lawsuits, caused such a scene that the manager had to intervene. I quietly paid the $300 bill while Madison ranted. In the car afterward, she didn't thank me. Instead, she commented how nice it must be to throw money around without thinking. Derek watched this transformation with growing alarm. He'd been in enough domestic situations, as a paramedic, to recognize the signs of escalating manipulation. He pointed out how Madison always managed to corner me when I was tired after long shifts, how she used our parents' death to guilt me, how she isolated me from other family members by controlling the narrative. I defended her at first, making excuses about stress and grief, but his words planted seeds of doubt I couldn't ignore. The discovery that Madison had been telling family friends I was hoarding grandmother's money came from Mrs. Chen, our childhood neighbor. She approached me at the farmer's market with sympathy in her eyes, saying she was praying for Madison's cancer treatments and admiring how I was supporting my sister despite my own financial selfishness. When I expressed confusion, she repeated Madison's story about my refusal to help with medical bills despite inheriting hundreds of thousands. The blood drained from my face as I realized the extent of Madison's campaign against me. I attempted a confrontation the following Wednesday. Instead of wine and takeout, I met Madison at a neutral coffee shop. I laid out my concerns calmly, using the techniques I'd learned in conflict resolution training at the hospital. Madison's response was a masterclass in manipulation. First came denial, then tears, then anger, then more tears. She accused me of being influenced by Derek, of choosing him over family. She brought up every sacrifice she'd claimed to make, every moment she'd been there for me. By the end, I found myself comforting her, apologizing for doubting her, promising to be a better sister. The pattern became predictable. Madison would push boundaries, I'd resist, she'd explode in tears or rage, and I'd cave. She trained me like a dog, rewarding compliance with affection and punishing resistance with emotional terrorism. I started dreading her visits, but felt too guilty to cancel them. After all, she was my only family. Our grandmother's voice echoed in my head, reminding me that family takes care of family, no matter what. During this time, I discovered more about Blake's true situation through my own research. His LinkedIn showed he'd been unemployed for 5 months, not the few weeks Madison claimed. Public records revealed they'd taken out a second mortgage on their house 6 months ago. Their social media still showed lavish vacations and expensive dinners, but I now recognized these as old photos being recycled. The facade of wealth was crumbling, and Madison was desperate to maintain it. The Wednesday visits became interrogations disguised as sister bonding. Madison would ask probing questions about my future plans, whether I was thinking of buying property, if I'd considered investment opportunities. She'd brought spreadsheets, showing how my money could triple if I invested in Blake's new venture, some vague tech startup he was supposedly launching. When I asked for specifics, she'd wave them away, saying I wouldn't understand the technical details, but should trust family. One evening, Madison arrived with legal documents. She presented them casually, saying Blake's lawyer friend had drawn up papers for a family investment partnership that would protect my assets while allowing them to grow. She'd already signed, she said, and just needed my signature to make it official. The documents were dense with legal jargon, but I caught references to power of attorney and asset transfer. When I said I'd need my own lawyer to review them, Madison's face transformed. The loving sister vanished, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. She snatched the papers back, accused me of destroying our family with my greed, and stormed out. The next morning, flowers arrived at my apartment with an apology note. Madison showed up that evening with my favorite dessert and tearful apologies. She blamed the fertility hormones, the stress of Blake's job loss, the grief over grandmother. She held my hands and reminded me that we only had each other in this world. Against my better judgment, I forgave her. The cycle continued, each iteration more intense than the last, each apology more elaborate, each manipulation more desperate. That Friday morning started like any other until my phone rang at 6:30. Madison's name flashed on the screen, and when I answered, hysteria poured through the speaker. Between sobs and hyperventilating gasps, she managed to convey that Blake had gambled away their entire savings in some cryptocurrency scheme. They were going to lose everything, she wailed. The house, the cars, their entire life would be repossessed within 48 hours unless they could pay off the debts. I threw on clothes and raced to her house, my nursing instincts overriding my growing doubts about her truthfulness. The scene at Madison's house was chaos orchestrated to perfection. Boxes were scattered everywhere, labeled with black marker, as if ready for immediate evacuation. Madison sat in the middle of the living room floor, surrounded by what appeared to be legal documents and bank statements. Her face was swollen from crying, mascara streaked down her cheeks in perfect tragic lines. An eviction notice was taped to the coffee table where I couldn't miss it. As I knelt beside her, she collapsed into my arms, her body shaking with sobs that felt rehearsed despite their intensity. Through her tears, Madison spun a tale of Blake's secret gambling addiction. He'd started with small cryptocurrency investments, she explained, then gotten caught up in some elaborate scheme that promised massive returns. She showed me printouts of trading accounts with massive negative balances, emails from lawyers threatening immediate action, bank statements showing their accounts emptied. The numbers were staggering. According to the documents, Blake had lost over $500,000 in a matter of weeks. I studied the papers while Madison clung to me, her tears soaking through my shirt. Something felt off about the documents. The formatting was inconsistent, the lawyer's letterhead looked pixelated, and the bank statements had suspicious irregularities in the font. But Madison's distress seemed so real, her shaking so violent, that I pushed aside my doubts. I offered her $20,000 to help with immediate expenses, while they figured out a long-term solution. The transformation was instant and chilling. Madison shoved me away, her tear-stained face contorting with rage. $20,000, she spat, like I was offering pocket change. Did I understand they were about to be homeless? Did I comprehend that Blake might go to prison for fraud if they couldn't pay back investors? How could I sit on hundreds of thousands while my only sister faced complete destruction? The accusations flew fast and sharp. I was selfish, heartless, had always been grandmother's favorite, because I'd manipulated the old woman just like I was manipulating everyone now. She began rewriting our entire childhood through a lens of perceived injustice. According to Madison's new narrative, I'd systematically turned grandmother against her. Every moment I'd spent gardening with Dorothy was calculated to win favor. My career in nursing was chosen specifically to appeal to grandmother's soft heart. Even our parents' death was twisted into my advantage. I'd been the one grandmother comforted most, because I'd played the victim better. The viciousness of her words left me breathless, each accusation more unhinged than the last. As Madison ranted, I noticed details that didn't fit her story. Blake's golf clubs were still in the corner, supposedly sold weeks ago to pay debts. Through the window, I could see his BMW in the garage, the one allegedly repossessed by creditors. The refrigerator hummed with the same sub-zero luxury I'd always envied, hardly the first thing someone facing bankruptcy would keep. When I pointed out these inconsistencies, Madison's fury reached new heights. She accused me of looking for excuses to abandon her, of being so corrupted by money that I'd lost all human compassion. The performance reached its crescendo when Madison threatened suicide. If I didn't help, she said, I'd find her body by morning. She'd make sure the note explained exactly why she'd been driven to it. Everyone would know that her own sister's greed had killed her. She grabbed a bottle of pills from the counter, shaking them dramatically, challenging me to call her bluff. My nursing training kicked in, recognizing the manipulation even as my heart raced. I remained calm, suggested we call a crisis hotline together, offered to stay with her. This wasn't the response she expected, and for a moment, her mask slipped entirely. In that moment of uncertainty, I made a decision that changed everything. I excused myself to the bathroom and called Blake directly. His number was saved in my phone from family dinners, though we'd never spoken one-on-one. He answered on the third ring, his voice casual and cheerful, clearly on a golf course from the background noise. When I asked about the financial emergency, his confusion was genuine. What emergency? He asked. What was Madison talking about? They were fine, had just booked a vacation to Turks and Caicos. Was I feeling okay? The conversation with Blake lasted only minutes, but it shattered the last of my illusions. He knew nothing about cryptocurrency losses, gambling debts, or eviction notices. When I mentioned the $500,000 loss, he laughed, saying they'd never had that much to lose in the first place. He promised to talk to Madison about whatever game she was playing and apologized for the drama. His casual dismissal of the situation told me this wasn't the first time Madison had created elaborate deceptions. I returned to find Madison on the phone with someone, speaking in urgent whispers. When she saw me, she quickly ended the call and resumed her hysteria. But something had shifted in her eyes. She knew I knew. The tears stopped flowing as easily, the shaking became forced. We stared at each other across the room, two sisters separated by an ocean of lies. I told her calmly that I'd spoken to Blake, that I knew the truth. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Madison didn't deny it immediately. Instead, she shifted tactics with sociopathic ease. Fine, Blake wasn't in trouble, but they needed the money for something even more important. She began spinning a new tale about investment opportunities, about how my money could secure both our futures. When I remained unmoved, she tried guilt about the fertility treatments again. Then stories about Blake's fictional depression. Each lie was replaced seamlessly with another, like a desperate salesperson cycling through pitches. I stood to leave, and Madison blocked the door. The sister I'd grown up with was completely gone, replaced by someone capable of anything. She grabbed my wrists, her manicured nails digging into my skin, and hissed that I wasn't leaving until I agreed to help. The mask wasn't just slipping anymore, it was completely off. I saw years of resentment, jealousy, and entitlement naked on her face. For the first time in my life, I was physically afraid of my own sister. The standoff might have escalated further if neighbors hadn't intervened. Madison's earlier hysterics had attracted attention, and Mrs. Patterson from next door knocked to check if everything was okay. The interruption broke Madison's grip, both physically and psychologically. I pushed past her and left, her threats following me to my car. She'd destroy me, she screamed. Everyone would know what kind of person I really was. I'd regret this betrayal for the rest of my life. As I drove away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I knew our relationship was over. Saturday evening arrived with an ominous quiet. I'd spent the day processing Friday's revelations, talking with Derek, and trying to make sense of how my sister had become a stranger. The knock on my door at 7 wasn't unexpected. I knew Madison wouldn't give up easily. What I didn't anticipate was opening my door to find not just Madison, but our cousin Stephanie and our great-aunt Carol standing in my hallway like an intervention committee. Madison's eyes gleamed with triumph as she pushed past me, her recruited allies following with uncomfortable expressions. They arranged themselves in my living room like a tribunal. Madison took the center seat on my couch, flanked by Stephanie and Aunt Carol. I noticed Madison had dressed carefully for this performance, wearing a conservative black dress that made her look vulnerable and serious. Stephanie, barely 22 and always eager to please, fidgeted with her purse straps. Aunt Carol, our grandmother's sister-in-law in her 70s, looked deeply uncomfortable but determined. Madison had chosen her witnesses well, people who would be torn between loyalty to family and their own moral compasses. Madison began with a speech that sounded rehearsed and focus-grouped. She spoke about family responsibility, about how grandmother Dorothy would be horrified to see me hoarding money while my sister suffered. She'd apparently spent the entire night crafting a new narrative. Now the story was that Blake's investment firm was being investigated by federal authorities, and without immediate legal representation, he'd become a scapegoat for his boss's crimes. The tears were more controlled this time, strategic rather than hysterical. She'd learned from Friday's failure. The new demand was specific and non-negotiable. Madison needed exactly $150,000, my entire inheritance, for emergency legal fees. She produced a folder of official-looking documents, sliding them across my coffee table with practice gravity. There were letters from a law firm I'd never heard of, federal subpoenas with Blake's name, bank documents showing frozen assets. Stephanie gasped at the appropriate moments, clearly having been coached on when to react. Aunt Carol remained silent, but I could see doubt flickering in her eyes. I picked up the documents, examining them with the same attention I'd give to a patient's chart. The letterhead was more convincing this time, but the contact information led to disconnected numbers. The federal subpoenas had formatting errors that real government documents wouldn't contain. Most telling, the dates were inconsistent, some showing Blake being investigated for crimes allegedly committed after the investigation supposedly began. When I pointed out these discrepancies, Madison was ready with explanations. Clerical errors, she said. The real documents were with the lawyers. These were just copies to show the family. Stephanie spoke for the first time, her voice small but determined. She revealed that Madison had promised her money from my inheritance once this crisis was resolved. $10,000 for Stephanie to finish college without loans. Madison had painted me as the selfish sister, who preferred to see family struggle rather than share grandmother's gift. Stephanie admitted she'd been posting on social media about my cruelty, trying to pressure me into helping. The confession came with tears and apologies, but the damage was already done. Aunt Carol's contribution was more measured, but equally painful. Madison had been visiting her for weeks, sharing stories of my supposed greed and heartlessness. She'd shown Carol fake text messages where I allegedly said cruel things about the family, about how I deserved the inheritance, because I was the only one who'd truly loved grandmother. Carol admitted she'd been troubled by the messages, as they didn't sound like me, but Madison's tears and desperation had been convincing. The elderly woman looked at me with sadness, asking why I'd become so cold to my own blood. I realized then the extent of Madison's campaign against me. This wasn't just about money anymore. She'd systematically poisoned every family relationship I had, turning relatives into weapons against me. The inheritance had become secondary to the need to destroy me for refusing to comply. I thought of cult tactics, how leaders isolate and attack those who resist. Madison had studied me for months, learning exactly which pressure points to exploit. The presence of Stephanie and Carol was meant to break me through shame and social pressure. When I continued to refuse, Madison escalated to outright threats. She'd hired a lawyer, she claimed, to challenge grandmother's will. There were grounds for mental incompetence, undue influence. She'd drag grandmother's name through court, force an exhumation if necessary, make our family a public spectacle. The threats were wild, legally baseless, but delivered with such venom that Stephanie physically recoiled. This wasn't about Blake's fictional legal troubles anymore. This was about punishment for defying Madison's will. The folder of demands grew thicker as Madison pulled out more papers. Now there were contracts giving her power of attorney over my finances, documents signing over my rights to any future family inheritances, even papers that would give her control over my medical decisions. The audacity was breathtaking. She wasn't just asking for money anymore, she wanted complete control over my life. When I laughed at the absurdity, her face contorted with rage. How dare I laugh at her pain, at our family's destruction? Violence entered the room like a third presence. Madison stood abruptly, knocking over my coffee table, sending papers flying. My nursing awards crashed to the floor, glass shattering. She grabbed the photo of grandmother from my mantel, the one where Dorothy held us as children, and smashed it against the wall. The sound brought my neighbor running, pounding on my door. Madison screamed that I was attacking her, that someone should call the police. The calculation behind her hysteria was obvious. She wanted witnesses to see me as the aggressor. Derek's timing was perfect, arriving for our planned dinner date just as Madison's performance peaked. His paramedic uniform gave him immediate authority as he entered my apartment, taking in the scene with professional calm. Madison made the mistake of rushing at him, clawing and screaming that he was the reason I'd abandoned family. His training in dealing with violent patients served him well as he easily restrained her without causing harm, all while Stephanie filmed on her phone, likely at Madison's prior instruction. The police arrived within minutes, called by multiple neighbors who'd heard the commotion. Madison immediately switched to victim mode, claiming I'd assaulted her, that Derek had brutalized her. But the officers were experienced with domestic disputes. They separated everyone, took statements, examined the scene. The destruction was clearly one-sided, my belongings broken while Madison remained uninjured despite her claims. Aunt Carol's shaky voice carried weight, as she admitted Madison had been the aggressor, that she'd been uncomfortable with the entire confrontation. As the officers questioned everyone, Madison's story unraveled further. She couldn't keep her various narratives straight, alternating between Blake's gambling, federal investigations, and my supposed crimes against the family. Stephanie broke down completely, admitting Madison had promised her money to lie, that she'd been coached on what to say. The officers exchanged knowing looks. This wasn't their first encounter with family inheritance drama, and Madison's manipulation was textbook. The officers gave Madison a choice to leave peacefully or face charges for destruction of property and filing false reports. The fight drained out of her as she realized her nuclear option had failed. As she gathered her purse, she delivered her final blow with cold precision. I was dead to her, she announced. She'd make sure everyone knew what I'd done. There would be consequences for choosing money over blood. The family curse she invoked was creative, specific, and delivered with enough conviction to make Aunt Carol cross herself. After everyone left, Derek and I sat in my destroyed living room, processing the wreckage, both physical and emotional. He held me as I cried, not for the sister who'd just threatened me, but for the one I'd lost long ago. Maybe she'd never existed at all, just a performance Madison maintained until it no longer served her purposes. Derek suggested gently that it might be time to consider serious protective measures. Restraining orders, security systems, maybe even relocation. The idea of running from my own sister seemed impossible, but the evening's events had shown me that impossible had become necessary. Sunday morning brought the kind of clarity that comes from hitting rock bottom with family relationships. Derek had stayed the night, helping me clean up the physical remnants of Madison's rage while I processed the emotional debris. Over coffee and sleepless exhaustion, he suggested something that hadn't occurred to me in the chaos: hiring a private investigator to look into Madison's activities. His paramedic work had taught him that people who create elaborate deceptions rarely do so just once. If Madison was willing to go this far with me, chances were I wasn't her first victim. The private investigator Derek recommended was a former police detective named Janet Rodriguez, who specialized in financial fraud within families. When I met her Monday morning, she listened to my story with the kind of professional detachment that made me feel less crazy for the first time in weeks. She'd seen this pattern dozens of times, she assured me. Family members who felt entitled to money they hadn't earned, who created elaborate schemes to guilt or force relatives into compliance. She took the case immediately, warning me that what she might find could be painful. The initial findings came faster than expected. Janet had contacts at various financial institutions and real estate offices who'd dealt with Madison professionally. What emerged was a pattern of complaints and near misses with legal trouble. Madison had been let go from 2 previous real estate agencies for irregularities in escrow accounts. Nothing prosecutable, but enough to make employers nervous. There were also civil complaints from former clients about misrepresented property values and hidden fees. Madison had always managed to settle out of court, using charm and tears to avoid consequences. The deeper Janet dug, the more disturbing the pattern became. She discovered that Madison and Blake weren't just facing financial difficulties, they were orchestrating something bigger. Public records showed they'd incorporated a development company 6 months ago, seeking investors for a luxury resort project in Costa Rica. The initial buy-in for partners was exactly $150,000. Marketing materials found online promised 300% returns within 2 years. It had all the hallmarks of her investment scheme, targeting wealthy retirees and family members with promises too good to be true. Janet's investigation revealed email exchanges between Madison and Blake that turned my stomach. Through a contact who'd been approached as a potential investor, she obtained copies of their communications where they discussed their targets. I was mentioned by name, described as the golden goose who just needed the right pressure. They laughed about my gullibility, my nursing school bleeding heart. Blake had written that family was the easiest mark, because they couldn't believe their own blood would scam them. Madison's response was even colder, that I'd always been too stupid to see what was right in front of me. The investigator uncovered Madison's previous victims through careful research and interviews. Lydia Chen, Madison's former best friend from college, had lost $50,000 in what Madison claimed was a charity for underprivileged children. The charity existed only on paper, the money disappearing into Madison's accounts. When Lydia tried to recover her funds, Madison had threatened to expose fabricated secrets about Lydia's marriage. The intimidation worked, and Lydia never pursued legal action, though she warned anyone who would listen about Madison's true nature. More stories emerged like a horrible tapestry. Madison's first husband, Robert, shared through his lawyer how she'd systematically drained their joint accounts during their marriage, always with elaborate explanations about family emergencies or investment opportunities. The divorce had been brutal, with Madison accusing him of abuse when he tried to recover his money. She'd forged his signature on loan documents, maxed out credit cards in his name, and left him with hundreds of thousands in debt. He'd spent years rebuilding his credit and life, warning me to run as far and fast as possible. The pattern was consistent and chilling. Madison would identify targets with money or access to money. She'd create a crisis that required immediate financial intervention. When victims hesitated, she'd escalate with emotional manipulation, threats, or actual violence. Those who gave in rarely saw their money again. Those who resisted faced campaigns of harassment and reputation destruction. Janet found at least 6 victims over the past decade, with losses totaling over $500,000. I wasn't special to Madison. I was just the latest target, made vulnerable by family connection and grandmother's inheritance. The revelation about grandmother's will was the most painful discovery. Janet found records showing Madison had visited grandmother's estate lawyer multiple times in the months before Dorothy's death. She tried to convince him that grandmother was showing signs of dementia, that the will should be updated with Madison as executor. The lawyer had refused, noting that Dorothy was sharp as ever and had actually expressed concerns about Madison's financial responsibility. Grandmother had known exactly who Madison was and had protected me even in death, by keeping the inheritance simple and direct. Janet discovered something that explained Madison's detailed knowledge of my finances. 3 months ago, someone had attempted to add Madison as an authorized user on my bank accounts using forged documents. The bank's fraud department had caught it and denied the request, but they'd never notified me due to an administrative error. Madison had my social security number, copies of my signature, and enough personal information to attempt identity theft. Only the bank's security protocols had prevented her from simply taking what she wanted without the elaborate emotional manipulation. The investigator also solved the mystery of Blake's involvement. While he was certainly complicit in the development company scheme, he wasn't the mastermind Madison portrayed him to be. Janet found evidence of Madison controlling their finances entirely, with Blake serving more as a convenient prop in her schemes. His recent unemployment was real, but caused by Madison's interference at his workplace, where she'd created drama that made his position untenable. He was both perpetrator and victim, trapped in a marriage with someone who used everyone around her. My work friend Sarah's story added another layer to Madison's deception. She revealed that Madison had been showing up at the hospital for weeks, having lunch with different staff members, spreading poison about my character. She'd told tales of my cruelty to dying grandmother, my refusal to help with family medical bills, my secret drug problem that I hid from supervisors. Most people dismissed her as a troubled family member, but doubts had been planted. Some colleagues had started treating me differently, and now I understood why. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. Derek revealed that Madison had approached him separately 2 weeks ago, while I was working a night shift. She'd shown up at his apartment at 11 at night, claiming she needed to talk about my mental health. She'd worn a revealing dress and tried to seduce him, suggesting that if he really cared about me, he'd help convince me to be more generous with family. When he rejected her advances and threatened to tell me, she'd switched tactics, warning him that I'd never believe him over my own sister. He'd been carrying this burden, unsure how to tell me without causing more family drama. Janet compiled everything into a comprehensive report that painted a picture of a serial predator who happened to share my DNA. The evidence was overwhelming and legally actionable. Madison had committed fraud, attempted identity theft, and harassment across multiple victims. The prosecutor's office would be interested, Janet assured me, especially given the pattern and the amounts involved. But she also warned me that family cases were complicated. Victims often refused to testify, juries sympathized with family bonds, and someone like Madison could play the desperate sister card effectively. As I read through the report, seeing my sister's true nature documented in black and white, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Vindication that I wasn't crazy or paranoid. Grief for the sister I'd never really had. Anger at the years of subtle manipulation I was only now recognizing. And underneath it all, a growing certainty that I needed to get far away from Madison before her schemes escalated further. Janet agreed, noting that Madison's pattern showed increasing violence with each failed scheme. I was in danger, more than I'd realized. Monday morning arrived with Madison's retaliation in full force. I woke to find my social media flooded with notifications. Madison had posted across every platform, crafting a narrative that painted me as a monster who'd stolen from our dying grandmother. She'd created fake screenshots of text conversations where I supposedly said horrible things about family members, expressed glee over inheriting money, and plotted to cut everyone out of my life. The posts were sophisticated, using just enough truth mixed with lies to seem credible. By breakfast, I had dozens of messages from distant relatives and acquaintances expressing shock at my cruelty. The smear campaign was meticulously planned. Madison had timed her posts for maximum visibility, tagging family members, mutual friends, and even some of my nursing colleagues. She'd included photos from grandmother's funeral where I looked stoic, claiming I was calculating my inheritance while pretending to grieve. Other photos showed her supposedly comforting me, with captions about how she'd always protected her troubled sister despite my mental health issues and addiction problems. The addiction claim was entirely fabricated, but she wrote with such conviction about my supposed pill problem that even I almost wondered if I had a secret life I'd forgotten. My phone rang constantly with calls from confused relatives. Some offered help for my fictional addiction, others demanded explanations for my cruel messages, and a few simply wanted to express their disappointment in how I had turned out. Each conversation required exhausting explanations, and even then, many remained suspicious. Madison had poisoned the well so thoroughly that my denials sounded exactly like what a guilty person would say. The genius of her attack was its comprehensiveness. She'd anticipated every possible defense and preemptively countered it. The professional attacks began Tuesday morning. My hospital's Human Resources Department called me in for a meeting regarding anonymous complaints about my character and fitness for patient care. The complaints alleged that I had substance abuse issues, had stolen from elderly patients, and had exhibited erratic behavior that endangered children in my care. The allegations were so serious that I was immediately placed on administrative leave pending investigation. My supervisor, who'd known me for 7 years, apologized but said protocol had to be followed. Madison had found the nuclear button for my career and pressed it without hesitation. Wednesday brought an eviction notice taped to my door. My landlord, a generally reasonable man named George, explained that he'd received multiple complaints about drug activity in my apartment. Neighbors I'd never met claimed to have seen suspicious people coming and going at all hours. Someone had anonymously reported that I was dealing prescription drugs stolen from the hospital. George didn't believe it, but his property management company required him to act on such serious allegations. I had 30 days to vacate unless I could prove the complaints were false. The stress of potentially losing both my job and home simultaneously left me barely functional. The vandalism started Thursday night. I came home from meeting with my lawyer to find my car covered in red spray paint spelling out thief and junkie. The security cameras that should have caught the perpetrator had mysteriously malfunctioned during the exact window of the crime. Inside my apartment building, someone had superglued my mailbox shut and left a note saying family remembers betrayal. The handwriting was disguised, but I recognized Madison's dramatic flair. Living in fear in my own home, jumping at every sound, checking locks obsessively, I realized this was exactly what she wanted. Friday afternoon, a delivery arrived at my suspended workplace. A dozen black roses with a card reading for your career's funeral, love your sister. My colleagues who received it were horrified, finally beginning to understand what I was dealing with. But the damage to my professional reputation was already severe. Even when the investigation cleared me, which my lawyer assured me it would, the shadow of doubt would linger. Parents might request different nurses for their children. Colleagues might whisper about the drama I brought to the workplace. Madison had made me toxic by association. The flying monkeys Madison recruited were relentless in their harassment. Distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly felt compelled to message me about family loyalty. High school acquaintances shared Madison's posts, with added commentary about how money corrupts people. Even our old Sunday school teacher reached out to remind me about Bible verses on greed. Each person believed they were helping, intervening in a family crisis to save my soul. Madison had weaponized our entire social network against me, turning compassion into a cudgel. The paranoia became unbearable. I started seeing Madison everywhere, in every car that lingered too long at stoplights, in every unfamiliar face at the grocery store, in every unexpected phone call. Derek installed security cameras around my apartment, but they only confirmed my fears weren't unfounded. The footage showed someone trying my door handle at 3 in the morning, a figure in a hoodie who moved like Madison. Another night caught someone photographing my windows from the street. I wasn't paranoid. I was being stalked by someone who knew my every routine and vulnerability. My mental health deteriorated rapidly under the assault. Panic attacks struck without warning, leaving me gasping for breath in grocery store aisles and parking lots. Sleep became impossible without checking locks multiple times, and even then, nightmares plagued me. I dreamed of Madison breaking in, of waking to find her standing over my bed, of her convincing everyone I was insane until they locked me away. The dreams felt prophetic rather than paranoid. If she could destroy my job and home with lies, what else was she capable of? Derek became my lifeline during this period, though Madison tried to destroy that too. He started receiving anonymous messages claiming I was using him, that I had a history of mental illness he didn't know about, that other boyfriends had restraining orders against me. Photos surfaced of me with male colleagues, innocuous work situations photographed to look intimate. Derek never wavered in his support, but I could see the strain in his eyes. How long before Madison's poison worked its way into the strongest relationship I had? Saturday morning brought a new low. I woke to pounding on my door and found 2 police officers responding to a welfare check. Someone had called claiming I was suicidal, had texted goodbye messages to family members. The officers were kind but thorough, checking my apartment for signs of self-harm preparations. The humiliation of explaining the situation, of proving my mental stability to strangers in my pajamas, nearly broke me. This was Madison's new tactic, using the system's protective mechanisms as weapons against me. The investigation at work progressed slowly, each day of suspension adding to my financial anxiety. Without my salary, I was burning through savings just to pay bills. Madison knew this, of course. She'd calculated exactly how long she could maintain pressure before I'd have to choose between financial ruin and giving her what she wanted. The inheritance that had started this war now felt like a curse. I found myself wondering if grandmother Dorothy had any idea what her final gift would unleash, if she'd have made different choices knowing one granddaughter would try to destroy the other. The final straw came Sunday evening when Madison appeared at the Children's Hospital during visiting hours. Security footage later showed her approaching families in the waiting room, expressing concern about the suspended nurse who'd cared for their children. She handed out printed copies of her social media posts, warning parents about my supposed drug problem, and suggesting they might want to have their children tested for exposure to substances. The security team escorted her out, but the damage was catastrophic. Monday morning, the hospital's legal team informed me that regardless of the investigation's outcome, the publicity made my return impossible. Derek found me that night sitting in my vandalized car, holding my nursing license and crying. 7 years of building a career I loved, destroyed in 2 weeks by someone who shared my blood. He didn't offer empty reassurances, or suggest Madison would eventually stop. Instead, he asked a simple question that changed everything: what if I just left? Not forever, but long enough to breathe, to rebuild somewhere Madison's poison couldn't reach. The thought was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Running felt like admitting defeat, but staying meant letting Madison slowly dismantle my entire life. The decision to fight back, with evidence rather than emotions, came during a sleepless Sunday night. Janet Rodriguez, my private investigator, had compiled enough documentation to bury Madison legally, but I'd hesitated to use it. Some misguided sense of family loyalty had held me back, but watching my career crumble finally shattered those chains. If Madison wanted war, I'd give her one she didn't expect, fought with facts rather than feelings. Monday morning, I met with both Janet and my lawyer, Sarah Winters, to develop a strategic counterattack. The first step was a forensic accounting of Madison's financial history. Sarah brought in a specialist, who uncovered layers of fraud dating back years. Madison had been filing false tax returns, claiming business expenses for her lavish lifestyle, while hiding income from her various schemes. The IRS would be very interested in the discrepancies between her reported income and her actual spending. We also discovered she'd been using a fake business entity to launder money from her victims, creating a paper trail that led directly back to her personal accounts. While the accountant worked on financial crimes, I focused on gathering evidence of Madison's current harassment campaign. I hired a digital forensics expert to trace the source of the anonymous complaints to my workplace and landlord. The IP addresses led back to Madison's home network and a coffee shop near her house. We documented every fake social media account she'd created to amplify her smear campaign, every forged screenshot, every manipulated photo. The digital trail was damning, showing hours of dedicated effort to destroy my life systematically. The breakthrough came when Janet discovered Madison's accomplice, a woman named Tara Breslin who worked at a printing shop. Tara had been helping Madison create the fake legal documents, the forged bank statements, and the fraudulent letters from law firms. When confronted with evidence of her participation in federal crimes, Tara quickly agreed to cooperate. She provided receipts, emails, and even recordings of Madison discussing her plans. Madison had been careless, believing her charm made her untouchable. Tara's testimony would be devastating in court. I set a trap to catch Madison in the act, sending an email from a fake account claiming to be a distant relative who'd heard about grandmother's other secret account containing an additional $200,000 in cash hidden in my apartment. The email suggested I didn't know about this money yet, that it was hidden in grandmother's old jewelry box. Within hours, my security cameras captured Madison attempting to break into my apartment using the emergency key she'd stolen. She spent 40 minutes searching frantically for non-existent money while I watched from Derek's house, recording everything through the remote app. The security footage was perfect evidence, showing Madison using lockpicks when the stolen key didn't work on my new locks, then systematically searching every inch of my apartment. She wore gloves to avoid fingerprints, but made the mistake of taking her hair down when she got frustrated, leaving DNA evidence on my furniture. Her face was clearly visible in multiple shots, destroying any possibility of claiming mistaken identity. When she found nothing, her rage was captured in high definition, as she deliberately broke items while searching, causing thousands in property damage. Madison's carelessness extended to her financial planning. Janet discovered she'd already started spending money she didn't have, putting deposits on luxury items using credit obtained through fraud. She'd reserved a new Mercedes, placed a down payment on investment property, and even booked first-class tickets to Europe for a celebratory vacation. All of this was documented in emails where she discussed her anticipated windfall from my inheritance. She'd been so confident in her scheme's success that she'd created a clear paper trail of motive and intent. The recorded conversation that sealed Madison's fate came from an unexpected source. Blake, finally realizing the extent of his wife's criminality and facing his own legal troubles, agreed to wear a wire during a dinner conversation. Madison, feeling secure with her husband, spoke freely about her plans. She admitted to the harassment campaign, laughed about my suspension from work, and detailed her intentions to escalate until I either paid or had a breakdown. She even mentioned considering physical harm if necessary, though she preferred psychological torture as cleaner. Blake's visible discomfort on the video only emphasized Madison's sociopathic calm. My lawyer compiled everything into a comprehensive criminal complaint. The evidence showed wire fraud, attempted identity theft, extortion, harassment, stalking, breaking and entering, destruction of property, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The federal charges alone could result in decades of prison time. State charges would add more. We also prepared civil suits that could financially devastate Madison, attaching liens to any assets she had. The woman who'd tried to steal my inheritance would lose everything she owned and face the possibility of spending her prime years behind bars. The meeting with prosecutors was scheduled for Thursday. I spent Wednesday making copies of everything, creating redundant backups, and ensuring the evidence was preserved multiple ways. Madison had shown me how vulnerable I was to destruction of reputation and property. I wouldn't make the same mistake with the evidence that could stop her. Safety deposit boxes, cloud storage, and trusted friends each held copies. If Madison somehow discovered my plans and tried to destroy the evidence, she'd have to rob banks and hack servers simultaneously. Tuesday afternoon, Madison made her final mistake. Somehow learning about my evidence gathering, perhaps through Tara, or her own paranoid surveillance, she became desperate. She called from a blocked number, not knowing I was recording, and explicitly threatened harm if I proceeded with legal action. She detailed how she'd make sure I'd never work in healthcare again, how she'd ensure every future employer knew I was a drug addict who stole from patients. Then she crossed the final line, threatening to hurt Derek if I didn't drop everything and pay her immediately. The recording captured every word in crystal clarity, adding witness intimidation and criminal threats to her growing list of charges. My lawyer moved quickly after the threatening call, filing for an emergency restraining order that was granted within hours. Madison would be arrested if she came within 500 feet of me, Derek, or our workplaces. The prosecutors, initially hesitant about a family dispute case, became eager after hearing the threat recording. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was a clear pattern of escalating criminal behavior that needed immediate intervention. They fast-tracked the case, planning arrests for both Madison and Blake by week's end. The trap worked better than expected. When Madison discovered the restraining order Wednesday morning, she lost all control. She sent a barrage of emails and texts, each one violating the order, each one adding to the evidence against her. She admitted to lies, threatened worse, and in her rage, confessed to crimes we hadn't even discovered yet. Apparently, she'd also been filing false insurance claims and had stolen grandmother's jewelry to sell, not keeping it for sentimental value as she'd claimed. Every message was forwarded to prosecutors, who amended charges to include additional felonies. Thursday's meeting with prosecutors was a formality. They'd already decided to pursue the maximum charges possible. Madison's pattern of behavior, the multiple victims, and the escalating violence made her a priority. They would seek remand without bail, considering her a flight risk given the European tickets she'd purchased. Blake would be offered a plea deal in exchange for testimony. The other victims Janet had found would be contacted, building a RICO-style case showing Madison's criminal enterprise. The woman who'd wanted to destroy me had instead destroyed herself through greed and hubris. The evidence package was so comprehensive that Madison's defense attorney, once hired, immediately began discussing plea bargains. There was no defending against recorded confessions, video evidence, financial documentation, and multiple witnesses. The best Madison could hope for was reducing a potential 30-year sentence to perhaps 15 with good behavior. Her life as she'd known it was over. The inheritance she'd killed our relationship to steal would now go entirely to her legal defense, and it still wouldn't be enough. Tuesday evening, after the prosecutors assured me Madison would be arrested within 48 hours, I finally allowed myself to think about my future beyond survival mode. Sitting in Derek's apartment, surrounded by boxes of evidence and legal documents, I remembered the dream I'd buried years ago about studying pediatric medicine at King's College London. The program I'd researched obsessively, but never pursued because of family obligations. With Madison's campaign of destruction leaving my local career in ruins and my family relationships shattered, there was nothing keeping me here anymore. For the first time, that felt like freedom rather than tragedy. The King's College website still had the program I'd dreamed about, an advanced fellowship in pediatric emergency medicine that would build on my nursing experience. The next cohort started in just 3 weeks, with applications being fast-tracked for experienced candidates. My hands shook as I filled out the online form, uploaded my credentials, and wrote a personal statement that carefully omitted the recent drama while emphasizing my dedication to children's healthcare. Within an hour, I received an automated response acknowledging my application and promising review within 5 business days. Derek found me at 3 in the morning, still researching London apartments and visa requirements. His reaction surprised me. Instead of trying to talk me out of leaving, he pulled up flight comparison websites and started helping me plan. He understood what I needed wasn't just physical distance from Madison, but psychological space to rebuild myself. We could make long-distance work, he assured me. He had vacation time saved, and London was just a flight away. His support made the impossible feel possible, the terrifying feel adventurous. Wednesday morning brought 2 life-changing emails. First, the prosecutors confirming Madison's arrest warrant had been signed. Second, King's College requesting a video interview for Friday. The program director had reviewed my application and was impressed by my experience with pediatric trauma cases. They had 1 spot left in the upcoming cohort due to a last-minute cancellation. If the interview went well, I could start in 2 weeks. The timeline was insane, but after weeks of living in crisis mode, insane felt normal. The interview preparation became my escape from the ongoing legal drama. While lawyers handled Madison's impending arrest, I studied recent developments in pediatric emergency medicine, practiced discussing my most challenging cases, and reminded myself why I'd fallen in love with nursing. Derek helped me prepare, running mock interviews and ensuring my setup looked professional despite the chaos of my half-packed apartment. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, focused on healing rather than defending. Thursday's news cycle brought surreal vindication. Madison's arrest made local news as part of a larger fraud investigation. The footage showed her being led away in handcuffs from her house, still in designer pajamas, screaming about persecution and demanding to call her lawyer. Blake was arrested separately at a golf course, looking relieved more than upset. Their assets were frozen pending investigation. The beautiful house Madison had used as a status symbol would be sold to pay restitution to victims. The Mercedes she'd loved more than family relationships was impounded as evidence. My King's College interview Friday morning went better than I could have hoped. The program director, Dr. Elizabeth Harper, was warm but challenging, asking detailed questions about my approach to pediatric trauma and my research interests. When she asked why I was leaving a successful position in Charleston, I simply said I was ready for new challenges after some recent family difficulties. She didn't press for details, instead focusing on my passion for developing better pain management protocols for children. By the end of our hour-long conversation, she was discussing housing options near the hospital rather than whether I'd be accepted. The official acceptance came Saturday afternoon with a start date in 12 days. The fellowship included a modest stipend that, combined with my inheritance, would allow me to live comfortably in London while studying. More importantly, it offered complete immersion in a new environment where Madison's poison couldn't reach. I booked a one-way ticket for the following Thursday, giving myself just enough time to pack, finish legal requirements, and say goodbye to the few untainted relationships I had left. The packing process was both practical and symbolic. I divided my life into 3 categories: things to take, things to store, and things to let go. The photos of Madison and me went into the trash, along with every gift she'd given me over the years. Each item I discarded felt like shedding poisoned skin. The things I kept were carefully chosen, reminders of grandmother Dorothy, mementos from patients who'd touched my heart, books that had shaped my nursing philosophy. Everything else could be replaced, or wasn't worth the wait. Informing my former workplace of my plans brought unexpected support. My supervisor, cleared of any wrongdoing in the investigation, wrote a glowing recommendation letter for King's College and promised my job would be waiting if I ever returned. Several colleagues organized a small goodbye gathering, expressing anger at how Madison's lies had forced me out. The pediatric ward's head physician gave me contact information for colleagues at Great Ormond Street Hospital, ensuring I'd have professional connections in London. Not everyone had believed Madison's poison. Derek and I spent our last days together creating memory anchors for our relationship to survive the distance. We revisited our first date spot, took photos at our favorite hiking trail, and made promises that felt substantial rather than desperate. He would visit in 6 weeks once I was settled. I would come back for Christmas if the legal situation allowed. We downloaded apps for video calls, synchronized our calendars, and approached the separation like adults who understood that sometimes love means supporting someone's need to fly. The hardest goodbye was to Charleston itself, the city that had been my only home. I drove past the hospital where I'd learned to save lives, the coffee shop where Derek and I met, the cemetery where my parents and grandmother rested. At Dorothy's grave, I left flowers and a letter explaining why I had to leave, how Madison had turned inheritance into warfare. I asked for her blessing on my journey and felt a warm breeze that seemed like approval. Maybe it was just weather, but it felt like permission to stop being the dutiful granddaughter and start being myself. Tuesday arrived with final preparations. My apartment was cleaned and ready for the subletter Derek had helped me find. My important documents were organized in a carry-on that wouldn't leave my sight. The inheritance money was safely transferred to accounts Madison couldn't touch even if she somehow made bail. I'd said my goodbyes, completed my obligations, and prepared for a new life. Only one task remained: deciding what to do about Madison's final communication. She'd managed to send one last message through her lawyer, technically legal, but emotionally manipulative. She claimed to forgive me for destroying our family, promised to get help for her obvious mental illness that I'd caused through years of psychological abuse, and hoped someday I'd find it in my heart to help her rebuild her life. The delusion was complete. Even facing decades in prison, she'd rewritten reality to make herself the victim. I deleted the message without responding. Some relationships couldn't be saved, only survived. Wednesday night, my last in Charleston, Derek and I didn't talk about Madison or London or the future. We ordered Chinese food, watched comedy shows, and pretended tomorrow wasn't coming. When morning arrived anyway, he drove me to the airport in pre-dawn darkness. At the security checkpoint, he kissed me goodbye and whispered that I was the bravest person he knew. I disagreed but appreciated the sentiment. I wasn't brave. I was just finally choosing myself over someone who'd proven family could be the deepest form of betrayal. The moment my plane lifted off from Charleston International Airport, I felt a physical weight dissolve from my shoulders. Below me, the city lights faded into darkness, taking with them months of harassment, manipulation, and fear. My phone, finally switched to airplane mode, stopped its incessant buzzing with updates about Madison's legal proceedings. For the next 8 hours, suspended between my old life and new one, I existed in peaceful limbo. The flight attendant who brought me tea noticed my tears and kindly offered tissues without questions. Sometimes strangers provide the exact comfort family fails to give. London greeted me with stereotypical rain that felt more like cleansing than gloom. The taxi ride from Heathrow to my temporary accommodation in Bloomsbury passed in a blur of unfamiliar streets and right-side driving. My flat was tiny by American standards, but perfect for my needs. One bedroom, a functional kitchen, walking distance to both King's College and Great Ormond Street Hospital. The landlady, Mrs. Patel, welcomed me with tea and biscuits, not knowing she was providing my first positive human interaction in this new chapter. The fellowship program began with Orientation Week, introducing 15 international medical professionals pursuing pediatric specializations. My cohort included doctors from Brazil, nurses from Japan, and researchers from Germany. When asked about my background during introductions, I simply said I'd wanted to expand my skills beyond the American healthcare system. Nobody pressed for personal details. Everyone had their own reasons for being thousands of miles from home. In that room of professional strangers, I found more acceptance than I'd experienced with blood relatives in months. Dr. Elizabeth Harper became more than just my program director. She intuited that I needed extra support without prying into why. She assigned me to shadow Dr. James Thompson, a pediatric emergency specialist known for both his clinical excellence and his mentorship. Under his guidance, I threw myself into learning with desperate intensity. Every new protocol mastered, every successful procedure completed, rebuilt a piece of the confidence Madison had systematically destroyed. The children I cared for didn't know or care about my family drama. They needed competent, compassionate care, which I could still provide despite everything. 3 weeks into the program, I finally allowed myself to process the trauma of the past months. The King's College counseling service was included in my fellowship, and I found myself in the office of Dr. Sarah Chen, a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Over tea and tissues, I unpacked the entire story, from grandmother's death to Madison's arrest. Dr. Chen listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that reframed my experience. She helped me understand that Madison likely had antisocial personality disorder, that her manipulation wasn't personal, but pathological. The therapy sessions revealed patterns I'd been blind to for decades. Madison had always been calculating, but I'd mistaken it for ambition. Her charm was a tool, not genuine warmth. Every kind gesture had been transactional, building credit she could cash in later. Dr. Chen helped me see that my guilt over Madison's arrest was misplaced. I hadn't destroyed my sister. I'd finally stopped enabling someone who would have consumed me entirely. The metaphor she used stuck with me. Sometimes, treating an infection requires amputation to save the patient's life. Derek's first visit came 6 weeks after my arrival, perfectly timed with Guy Fawkes Night. We watched fireworks from Primrose Hill, surrounded by celebrating Londoners, who had no idea we were reuniting after our longest separation. He brought news from home that Madison had accepted a plea deal for 12 years in federal prison with possibility of parole in 7. Blake had received 18 months and would testify against her. The victims she defrauded were being partially compensated from seized assets. My reputation in Charleston was slowly being rehabilitated as the truth emerged. Justice wasn't perfect, but it existed. The long-distance relationship required intentional effort, but strengthened our bond. Daily video calls became our routine, sharing the mundane details that keep intimacy alive. Derek sent care packages with American snacks I missed. I sent him photos of my daily life, the red buses, the ancient hospitals, the children who called me Miss Grace in adorable British accents. We planned his visits around my schedule, exploring London together, and creating new memories untainted by Madison's shadow. The distance was hard, but it also proved our relationship could survive external pressure. My work at Great Ormond Street Hospital exceeded every professional dream I'd harbored. The cases were complex, the resources better than anything I'd experienced in Charleston, and the learning opportunities endless. I began research on pediatric pain assessment tools for nonverbal children, work that earned recognition from department heads. Publications followed, then speaking invitations, then collaboration offers from other hospitals. The career Madison had tried to destroy was rebuilding stronger, like a broken bone that heals denser than before. 6 months into my London life, I received an unexpected letter forwarded by Derek. My cousin Stephanie had written to apologize again, but also to update me on family dynamics. Madison's arrest had shattered the image she'd cultivated for years. Other victims had come forward, including family members who'd been too ashamed to speak up before. Aunt Carol was organizing a support group for those Madison had manipulated. The family was healing, but they understood why I needed distance. Stephanie ended by saying grandmother would be proud of the life I was building. I kept the letter, but didn't respond. Some bridges shouldn't be rebuilt immediately. Christmas approached with Derek planning an extended visit. I'd established routines, friendships with colleagues, even a favorite pub where the bartender knew my name. London had transformed from escape route to actual home. The fellowship would end in 6 months, but the hospital had already discussed permanent positions. The possibility of staying, of building a life entirely separate from my Charleston past, grew more appealing daily. Derek supported whatever I decided, even discussing his own potential relocation. Love meant wanting your partner's happiness more than your convenience. News of Madison filtered through occasionally, always through legal channels rather than personal communication. She'd been transferred to a federal facility in Texas, far from her preferred Charleston social circles. Her attempts to maintain her image from prison failed spectacularly. Former friends shared stories of manipulation, previous victims found courage to speak publicly, and her reputation crumbled completely. She'd lost everything trying to steal what was never hers. The irony wasn't lost on me, but neither did it bring satisfaction. Mostly, I felt the peculiar grief of mourning someone still alive, but dead to you. A year after leaving Charleston, I stood in my London hospital, teaching a group of new nurses about pediatric trauma assessment. One asked about my journey from American healthcare to British, what motivated such a dramatic change. I smiled and gave my practiced answer about professional development and international experience. But internally, I thought about the real answer. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing their true nature so clearly that walking away becomes not just possible but necessary. Madison had given me that gift wrapped in manipulation and tied with threats. My London life wasn't perfect. I missed Derek during the long stretches between visits. Video calls couldn't replace physical presence. British weather remained persistently grey. The healthcare system had its own frustrations and limitations. But imperfect peace trumps perfect storm every time. I'd learned to find family in colleagues who supported my growth, in patients' parents who trusted me with their children, in the found community of expatriates navigating similar journeys. Blood might be thicker than water, but poison is thicker than both, and sometimes distance is the only antidote. The woman who boarded that one-way flight to London barely resembled who I'd become. That grace was running from someone. This grace was running toward something. The inheritance that started everything had funded not just my education, but my liberation. Grandmother Dorothy's final gift wasn't just money, but the means to discover who I could be without Madison's shadow. Every day, I saved a child's life, published research, or simply enjoyed peaceful existence. I honored Dorothy's memory better than maintaining toxic family ties ever could. My story ends not with dramatic confrontation or perfect resolution, but with quiet triumph. Madison serves her time in a federal prison, probably manipulating fellow inmates and planning her next scheme. Blake rebuilds his life free from her influence. Our extended family slowly heals from years of her deceptions. And I continue my work in London, saving children and building the life I'd always wanted but never thought possible. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, it's simply living well 3,000 miles from someone who tried to destroy you. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up with love, not invoices. Looking back at that moment in Charleston Airport, placing my one-way ticket on the counter with shaking hands, I understand now what I was really doing. Not running away, but finally running toward the life grandmother wanted for me. Toward the career Madison tried to steal. Toward the person I was meant to be before family obligations and misplaced loyalty clouded my judgment. That ticket wasn't just transportation. It was transformation. And despite everything it cost, I'd buy it again. What would you do if your own family became your worst enemy? If blood relatives saw you as nothing more than a bank account to drain? Sometimes love means staying and fighting, but sometimes it means knowing when to walk away. If my story resonates with you, if you've faced similar family betrayals, or are struggling with toxic relationships, I want you to know you're not alone. Drop a comment sharing your own experience with family manipulation, or how you've rebuilt after betrayal. Your story might help someone else find the courage to choose themselves. And remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's survival. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in protecting yourself from toxic people, even when they share your DNA. Like this video if you understand that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is buy that one-way ticket to your new life. Share it with someone who needs to hear that family shouldn't mean financial manipulation or emotional terrorism. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May you find the strength to recognize poison, no matter what form it takes, and the courage to seek your own antidote, even if it's 3,000 miles away. Until next time, remember that the best chapter of your life might begin the moment you stop writing someone else's story and start writing your own.